By way of background, for years my corporate job was estimating and predicting and calculating things in the financial world and the technical world. So that's all I did all day. How accurate were my predictions? Not very, because it turns out that predicting the future's kind of hard to predict the future. But were my predictions useful just the same? And the answer is yes. So if you don't understand this point, you're going to be very confused about what you see about numbers and decisions and stuff. One of the things we're seeing here is that people are really bad at math, and it makes a difference in how you, and science as well, I suppose, and it makes a difference in how you see the whole situation. If you don't know anything about math or economics, you can be sort of blinded to the tricks people are playing. And let me give you an example. In the New York Times, they've got a story that says there are 2,200 ventilators left in New York State, and they expect to need 350 per day. And so they just took the 2,200 that they have available, and they said, all right, how many does 350 go into that? And it's about 6 days. So they say, well, we got about 6 days supply. What's wrong with that calculation? Anybody? Anybody? Mueller? The answer is, it doesn't calculate people coming off ventilators. Because you don't use the ventilator and throw it away. People are coming on and coming off. So if the number was, and it's not, but let's say the number was they get off ventilators in 3 days, well, that completely changes how many days of ventilators you have. If it's 2 weeks, well, then you got a little more trouble. I've seen estimates from 9 to 11 days, some people saying 7, but let's say it's 10 days. You have to calculate that, right? The New York Times, writing a feature article, just takes the amount available and divides it by the amount you need per day and says, well, it looks like about 6 days. Are you kidding me? A 6th grader would know that's not the right answer, because people are coming off ventilators too. So yeah, it's difficult to calculate, but let me finish the point. So by way of background, for years my corporate job was estimating and predicting and calculating things in the financial world and the technical world. So that's all I did all day. How accurate were my predictions? Not very, because it turns out that predicting the future's kind of hard to predict the future. So, but were my predictions useful just the same? And the answer is yes. So if you don't understand this point, you're going to be very confused about what you see about numbers and decisions and stuff. Here's the point. Accuracy is not what you're shooting for. It'd be great if you could have it, but you can't be accurate about the future. That's not a thing. You can only predict and hope you're accurate. That's the best you can do. But it still tells you what to do and what not to do, even in its inaccurate form. And I'll just keep using this example. If you had a very inaccurate number, but it told you that we were somewhere between 0 and 30% of the number of ventilators we needed, that would tell you to do a major push to make more ventilators, even though your number is grossly, approximate. Likewise, if it was more like over 90%, you would make a different decision about where to put your resources. So you don't have to be that accurate. And the other thing is that people who are good at this can pretty quickly work through reasonable estimates. Okay? So for example, I'll give you an example from my budgeting days. So I would go to each department head and I'd say, give me your budget for the coming year. And then I would take all their budget information to my boss, and the boss would look at it and say, okay, cut it by 20%. Just cut everybody by 20%. Now, you think that's stupid, right? Because all the department heads told you what they needed. So if you cut it by 20%, they can't do their jobs, right? Well, here's where experience comes in. Because what I knew, and what my boss knew every time, is that the department managers would be padding their estimates. So they'd have too much, because they don't want to have too little. And we know, because human nature is human nature, that the department heads are not so dumb that they're going to double asking what they asked for last year unless they had some good reason. So you know they're not going to cheat by doubling it, because human nature, it would be too obvious, etc. You know they're not going to just increase it by 10%, because they're going to try to get a little more than that. So human nature is they're going to pick a number to pad it by that they think they can get away with, the biggest number they think they have a chance of getting away with, and big enough that if it got reduced a little bit, they'd still be okay. What is that number? Well, let me tell you from experience. It's usually around 20%. If you were to just randomly, survey a bunch of people in that position and say, all right, how much do you think you're going to pad it? You'd probably find that on average people would pad it about 20%. Now, do I know that? Do I have data for that? No, not at all. It's basically just something an experienced person would know automatically, because you just see it and you see it and you see it until it's just obvious that that's what's happening. So likewise, with this ventilator situation, if you told me, tell me how many the hospital says they have, I would probably in my mind say, well, that's probably the least number they have. they might have padded that a little bit because they don't want to run out. So in this case, they would pad it low. In other words, they tell you they had fewer ventilators than they really have. Once you sum up all those numbers, a good estimator would say, if we take their numbers at face value, it looks like this. But common sense says they may have padded it a little bit, and then you might figure that in. All right. Now, because it's life and death, you wouldn't want to try to cut it too close to the edge. You're still going to want to have more ventilators, not less. But these approximate numbers do give you some sense of what you should be doing.